Morning and welcome to Kirklees Standards Committee. We are being webcast live and recorded. First of all, just to look, we've not got any substitutes. I know we have two apologies, one from Alison Monroe and Councillor Shabia Pandor as well. In terms of the minutes of the previous meeting, any issues that any of the members of the committee have picked up from the previous minutes, or anything that they felt wasn't accurate that we need to look at?
Move them, Chairman.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to move, second that.
Yeah, seconded.
Yep, fine. Okay. And I think in terms of issues arising, I didn't pick anything up from that unless anybody else has got anything they wanted to pick up at this point. That's not on the agenda.
No.
No. Okay, excellent. Okay, we'll move on to item 3, interest. So if councillors, if they could declare any disclosable pecuniary interests with regards to this committee. Councillor Sokol.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my understanding is there is a question from a member of the public, which may relate to myself. Yeah, but I think it won't stop me in participating on the agenda item. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Sokol. I'm aware of that item. I will be responding to as well, and I agree. That should not stop you participating at this point.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Everybody else okay? Okay.
Yeah, Chairman, Paul.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Martin.
Yep. Interests, obviously, just on the Standards Committee, just to declare that I'm a proud member of Murfield Town Council.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anything? No. Yep. Yes, Councillor Amar.
Well, since my colleague is declaring a membership of Town Council, I'll declare a membership of Kirkburton Parish Council.
Thank you, and I will join in on that and declare that I'm also a member of Home Valley Parish Council, and I'm very proud to be as well. So excellent. It's good to hear that parish councils. Town councils are alive and well and kicking. Excellent. Okay, we'll move on from interest then to 4. In terms of public, we've not got anybody who's approached us to be part of the call from the public that I'm aware of. Okay, so we'll move on. And again on 5, we've not had any deputations or petitions. That moves us on to item 6, where indeed we do have a written question that's been submitted. And Lee, I believe that you will read that question out.
I will, Chair, thank you. It's a question from Mrs. Gloria Humphreys, and it's as follows. Does the Standards Committee only deal with matters concerning councillors? Has any complaint that has ever been upheld, or are they just a way of appearing to listen to the public and then ignoring or dismissing a complaint? After a statement sent to me about a recent complaint from the monitoring officer, which stated, there is a possibility that he may have been mistaken in his recollection of the precise route given the time period that has elapsed, which I find totally unacceptable. It could just easily have said, it does not matter what a councillor says at a council committee, whether it is true or not, as long as they say that they thought it was true. Just another way to dismiss a complaint. This is one of the reasons that people do not trust the complaints procedure. And why are any complaints that are sent about planning and highways reports presented to a planning committee simply ignored and get no response at all? Who is responsible for the complaint about these departments? As officers or departments working for Kirklees, surely someone must be responsible for the inaccurate and misleading information they present to the committees. Or again, doesn't it matter if people and committees are not given the full facts and only receive a substandard and misleading report? Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you, Mrs. Humphreys, for your question. I have asked for some brief background to the complaint that you referred to, so to help me with my response. So I've had that information, and in terms of the reference of the Standards Committee, it is primarily an overview of the complaints we receive about members and to monitor and review the code of conduct. It's perhaps important to know that despite this name, it doesn't deal with most standard complaints. I will ask the governance officer to share the terms of reference with you and also a copy of the complaints process for the standards matters and the process for dealing with complaints which are not standards matters as they are different. In relation to whether any complaint has ever been upheld, and I take it that you mean from this about councillors, yes, there have been many occasions where they have been upheld. They've also been upheld about many other issues as well. In relation to the complaint to which you refer, I understand that the monitoring officer responded to one aspect of the complaint, which related to the breach of conduct. I understand that you have received a response to the planning matter from a legal officer, and you then referred it to the customer complaints officer. I am told you will receive a response to that shortly. Once again, thank you very much for your question, Mrs. Humphreys. Okay. Have we got, Lee, we haven't got anything else? There are no other questions? That's
no further questions, Chair, no.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if we can move on then, and I think at this point we'll move on to the Code of Conduct complaints update, which obviously all members have had a chance to look at these. But David, I'd be very grateful if you could take us through these, and obviously we'll pick up any issues and questions as we run through that.
Yep, more than happy to do that. On a technical question, are the reports going to be put onto the screen for the benefit of members of the public?
No,
that is, yes,
no,
sorry.
Sorry, that's not something we do. Obviously, the reports are on the internet, but for public meetings, we don't show them now. No,
that's fine. I've got my reports on a different screen, so if I appear not to be looking at the camera, it's because I'm looking at the report. So the first report, it's the standard report we do every time. It roughly covers the 6-month period in between meetings of the Standards Committee, and it's an update on complaints that have come in during that period. It also acts as a comparator to the previous period, and there's some graphic representations of data that goes back to 2017. So it's also looking at the longer term trends. So this particular report is focusing on the complaints that have come in since the 11th of March 2020, which was the date this committee last met. And since the 11th of March 2020, there's been a total of 60 complaints that have come into the monitoring officer concerning alleged breaches of the code of conduct. There are some multiple complaints relating to 4 councillors, and by that I mean we've had more than one complaint about the same issue involving the same member. So 32 of those 60 complaints relate to Kirklees councillors, and that's a total of 13 councillors. So you can see that there are multiple complaints about individual members, and 28 of those relate to parish councillors, so roughly a 50-50 split. But the number of identified town or parish councillors complained about is 3, and that's from 3 town or parish councils. So looking at those 60 that have come in, 24 weren't progressed after the initial assessment process. And 1 was reported to us by the complainant as being resolved before it was able to go any further. A further complaint was dealt with as a staffing issue. That was a complaint that had been made by an officer. So that was dealt with as a staffing issue rather than a standards issue, so that came off. So that left us with 34. 2 of these were resolved informally. 18 were then progressed through the formal standards process, along with a further 3 that had been carried forward from the end of the last period, and findings were made. So the remaining 14 complaints are relatively recent and are currently being investigated before being considered further under the initial assessment process. So as I've said, there are a number of complaints involving 1 town or parish council. Of the 13 complaints recorded in the previous report is then ongoing. These are mostly now being concluded. 3 were taken through the formal standards process, along with the 18 from this period. And one of the complaints was dealt with as a staffing issue, as I said, rather than a standards issue. One of the complaints is on hold because we need some more information from the person that's made the complaint, and 4 complaints were not taken forward. So the previous report contained a total of 18 new complaints. If you can see there's quite a jump from 18 to 60 in the period. There were 18 complaints about 11 named Kirklees members, plus 6 town and parish councillors covering that period. So currently we've got 60 new complaints relating to 13 named Kirklees councillors and 3 named town or parish councillors. So the present report, the rough sort of split down of what the complaints are about is we've got behaviour towards members of the public. That's 5 complaints that relate to 6 members. 30 concern the behaviour of 4 members in social media posts. So again, it's half of the complaints relate to things that have been said or put on social media. 1 concerns behaviour towards an officer, and 22 concern behaviour at meetings, and 2 concern the behaviour of a member during the lockdown. So the sources, 6 were received from a town or parish councillor, 1 was from an officer of a town or parish council, 1 was from a Kirklees councillor, and the remaining 52 were from members of the public. So by and large, we're seeing the complaints coming in from members of the public rather than from other members or officers. So again, if we compare that to the previous report, we've got 3 complaints relating to 3 members on behaviour towards members of the public. 9 then concern behaviour of 5 members in social media posts. So social media posts are still a prominent feature. 1 concerned behaviour towards an officer. 1 concerned alleged failure to comply with sanctions from a previous complaint, and 3 concerned behaviour at meetings. And the 1 final complaint concerned allegations made in the local press. So the comparison between the reports shows really that the number of complaints has risen from 18 to 60, and the number of councillors complained about has I've put fallen slightly from 16 to 17. That's a typo. It should be risen slightly from 16 to 17. The problem with this is these reports are dynamic, so you draft them and then things happen and things need to be revised and changed, and that's unfortunately something that slipped through the proofing process. So it's a slight rise from 16 to 17, which again reinforces what I was saying about the fact that we may have one particular incident that sparks a large number of complaints and potentially gives us a spike, when if you look at it, if you're looking at it simply as a number of councillors complained about, you'd think, well, that's fine, there's hardly any change, it's only a slight rise. But as I said, the rise in the overall numbers is attributable to a high number of complaints about two councillors during the current period. I mean, we've had 6 instances of multiple complaints, with the same complaint being made and supported by more than one complainant. So again, the total number of complaints relating to town or parish councils has also risen in the current period, and arguably remains a cause for concern, as we have the same town or parish council member that was the subject of a large number of complaints previously. We've got a total of 24 complaints in the period about just one member. So if we scroll down, we've got the graphic representations, which really just reinforce sort of what I'm saying and make it perhaps easy to spot where the trends are. The first graph you can see is the complaint summary. That goes back all the way to May 2017. So it's quite a sort of, you know, good 3.5 years worth of information on complaints. And you can see that we've had, if you look at the first part, total complaints, and we've had a massive spike in two months, and those were, as I said, down to large numbers of complaints about effectively the same incident relating to the same members. Because if you follow it through to the total number of members complained of, it's gone up, yes, but it's reasonably consistent. It doesn't spike in the same way that the numbers of total complaints that have come in. So obviously we see a correlation between the total complaints and total complaints progressed through the complaints process, and we've seen reasonably up and down. It's fairly constant, certainly over the last 3 periods, on the number of Kirklees members complained about, and the number of town and parish council members complained about has been reasonably constant as well. It's a fairly low number. So the next graph is simply the total number of complaints in, and perhaps shows a bit more starkly that we've had those 2 periods where there's been a significant jump in the number of complaints that have come in. The graph after that gives us a breakdown of the sources of the complaints, and again it reinforces that most of the complaints at the end of the day are coming from members of the public rather than either from officers or from fellow councillors. And the next graph just gives a split of the total numbers in between town and parish councils. Arguably there's been a slight increase in the percentages that are recorded as coming from town and parish councils rather than Kirklees. If you look at the very first periods, 2017 and early 2018, there's a small number on top with the town and parish council complaints, and that's since then risen steadily, and we're now at a point where the latest figures are roughly 50-50 in terms of complaints relating to town and parish council members and Kirklees members. So the final graph is just a sort of my looking at whether there are any trends we can see there, and it's difficult because one of the things we're seeing is these spikes that are caused by if you like, one-off complaints about something that's happened that's grabbed the public's attention either through the media or through word of mouth, and has resulted in these spikes. So arguably that sort of skews things and makes it the picture a bit different to perhaps how it is in reality. I mean, one thing that occurred to me the other day was maybe what we should be doing is, as well as looking at the total number of complaints in, i.e., 5 members of the public have made the same complaint, also maybe look at the total number of complaints in as much as recording those 5 as one, so we can get much more of a look at the number of things that are being complained about rather than the straightforward number of complaints. So if members think that's something that may be useful, well, that's certainly something that I can look at incorporating into future reports, is the actual number of discrete complaints rather than the number of overall complaints, which might pull those, it certainly would pull those figures down for this period and the period before last, because we know that we've had 24 complaints effectively about the same thing, which would pull those figures right down and perhaps give a more accurate comparison in terms of what's causing the problems and where the trends are going. So if members think that's a worthwhile exercise, I'm more than happy to look at providing some further comparative figures for the next period.
Thank you, David. Excellent. Just a quick comment from me. Certainly, from my perspective, I think that's a very good suggestion. We'll see what other members think. So, I can see a hand up there from Councillor Homewood and Councillor Boat. Is that an old hand, as they say, or is that a new hand?
It's a new hand from an old hand.
There we go then. Okay. Well, I think you were first then. So Councillor Boat first, and then Councillor Homewood.
Thanks, Chairman. And thanks, David, for the report. I think in obviously looking at statistics, and which is what we are doing, one of the key questions should be, well, what are the outcomes of this? We've got the data on the number of complaints. Of those current ones that we have, or that we're reporting on, how many went to various stages? How many came to fruition, if you like, and what happened? What's the effectiveness of the process in those respects? We are again seeing multiple complaints about a single person. Across the piece, in terms of effectiveness, in the main, do members either of Kirklees and the parish and town councils comply with the findings of a standards hearing committee or anything, or do we find that members are just snubbing their nose and saying, so what? A point that I've raised before, and as we go towards budget setting, the cost, because it seems again that we're seeing a 50-50 cost split between Kirklees issues and parish and town council issues, with one set of complaints from one parish at this time taking a lot of Kirklees' time and money. And I think the ratepayers should have that in mind, that, as I've said before, this is a service that Kirklees currently provides free for those town and parish councils, but it's costing the ratepayers of Kirklees a lot of money. Again, in terms of data, we've got a 50-50 split and things, but from rough knowledge, I would say we probably have more town and parish councils in Kirklees, although we only have 5 bodies, than we have Kirklees councillors. So pro rata, the complaints may not be that disparate. And we noticed that there are complaints, I think, on both periods coming from member staff relationships. And I think there's a certain amount of parity needed, that where if a councillor has a concern about the way that a member of staff is behaving, that's referred to through their line manager, etc. If a member of staff doesn't like what a councillor says, we're seeing that report to standards and going through a more formal process when it could be referred through our group business manager. And again, the parity, we had a report on corporate governance and audit last week, which dealt with what I would say is a standards issue, that an employee of the council attended a planning committee in a professional capacity and also spoke in a personal capacity. And a resident felt there was a conflict of interest, which, having been in a similar situation, I was told that I had to leave a planning committee when I had a personal interest. But here we see members of staff presenting or being involved with the planning committee in a professional capacity and then switching hats. And that was dealt with internally. So I think there is a discrepancy between the two sides, the officer side and the member side, both in terms of how complaints are received and handled and how they're dealt with. So there's about 5 points there, Chair. But again, thanks very much for the report, David.
Okay, I don't know if Julie wants to come in at all on any of those points, but certainly looking at talking about sort of the complaints and how they've been dealt with. I mean, 24 were not progressed after the initial assessment, which I would have said is an indication that the process we've got is working. What we do is we look at complaints that come in, decide whether they're with merit, with evidence that supports them, and then a decision's made as to whether or not they progress. So nearly half of the complaints didn't go forward because they were regarded as complaints that didn't have legs, if you want to use that phrase, and weren't going to stand up. You mentioned sort of what you described as a sort of difference or disparity between how staff at town or parish councils or staff at Kirklees will be dealt with in terms of them making a complaint about a councillor. One of the ones, the only one we've had actually this period that was an officer complaint about a member, stayed within the town or parish council and was resolved by the staffing committee rather than put through the standards. So I agree with you. There's effectively two ways that this could go. It could either go as a standards complaint, or it could go as a staffing complaint, because you're at this unique position that an employee of a town or parish council, of Kirklees Council, they're not a member of the public, but they've also got this alternative avenue because they're an employee of the council. And in this particular one, I know it was referred back to the staffing committee of the council.
Do you want me to
I
come
was
back?
going to say, Julie, if you'd like to come in as well, Julie, please.
I'll try and pick up on and Councillor Bolt, you'll have to remind me if I've not covered off any of the points that David's not covered off. Okay, I'm sure you'll come back to me. So just in terms of, I think you asked the question about the outcomes and the effectiveness of the process. So by that, I think you mean how many issues were considered through the decision-making process. So effectively, they went and they were considered by myself, the chair of standards, and the independent person after consultation with group business managers. I think that there was a lot over the summer period which related to one particular individual, and I think that David will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were 5 or 6 separate individual complaints. A number of them were multiple in relation to the individual. My understanding is that all of those were upheld against him. So they were found. He was found to have been in breach of the code of conduct in relation to the particular parish council. I can't remember the exact timing of the 6-month period. I think there may have been a couple of others which were considered through the process, and one of those may not have been upheld. But David can remind me, because he's got more of the detail of that in terms of the 6-month period and when we met as with the GBMs. Okay, so he can give that. We should perhaps do that, and we can include that in the report. It's a very good point, Councillor Bolt, and we should perhaps say that. They are obviously now all published on our website. When we first introduced the new standards process, we call it new, it's now 7 years old, we didn't put all of the decisions in a public space. We do now, after we reviewed the standards process a couple of years ago. So the outcome of all of the decisions which go through the formal process or reach that level are now on our website. And in the case of those which are parish or town councils, they also appear on the parish and town council website. But let's make a note, David, for future, to make sure that we say those that have actually been through the formal panel process and a decision taken in relation to that. In terms of the point you make about officers, I think David's covered it to a great extent. I know the point that you're getting at, but unfortunately, in relation to members, there's a code of conduct and it's in a public space, and therefore we have to deal with any complaints that we receive. In relation to those which are from, I think all of the ones that were received, as David suggested, which are from officers, were not from Kirklees council officers, they were from town or parish council officers. And I think David has correctly suggested that they were dealt with through a different means. But we do collect that information, and it's important that we share it, so you have that. To my recollection, we've not received a formal complaint from Kirklees officers about councillors, which have come through the standards complaints process. As you'll be aware, there is in the council's constitution a member officer protocol, which sets out a number of behaviours that both members and officers are expected to comply by in relation to how we work with each other on a day-to-day basis. There is a process in there which deals with if members have an issue in relation to officers, or officers have an issue in relation to members, which picks up, which is dealt with by senior members initially, group business managers or group leaders, depending on the member who's being complained of. So there is a process which is meant to apply. I have to say, in my recollection, it's rarely used, and we try to resolve things informally. But the member officer protocol is rarely used. If it fails, then that could go through the standards process. But that's a last resort, and I would expect that it would have been a very serious matter, and if we weren't able to resolve it through some other means. Okay, so hopefully that deals with that aspect of it. You raised a question about the cost of this, and I recollect you've raised that issue before. You're not the first person to raise the cost of it, or the last person to raise the cost of it. Quite a lot of it will depend from 6-month period to 6-month period, but I would probably reflect that over my period here as monitoring officer, quite a significant amount of the time that's spent dealing with standards issues has been in relation to town and parish councils. legislation requires that the monitoring officer for the principal council is responsible for dealing with complaints relating to town and parish councillors. Unfortunately, there isn't a specific requirement for town and parish councils to pay for that process. But it does take up quite a significant amount of time. Maybe there's a need to have a conversation with town and parish councils about some of the issues that causes for time, some of the time constraints that we have, in particular during COVID. You know, lots of officers have been taken up with dealing with lots of other issues. It's not all visible to everybody, but we are really busy dealing with lots of things, and actually dealing with 60 complaints, half of which are in relation to town or parish councillor, is quite time consuming and takes up quite a lot of David and my own time, but also other officers when we do investigations in relation to those matters. In terms of the outcome and whether people comply with those outcomes or not, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's very difficult, as you'll know, and I think there's a report later on in here about the outcome of some of the recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life about best practice and recommendations about what we should do and about standards processes. And as you recall, a couple of years ago, they asked us our views about whether or not the standards process had teeth to enable us to use appropriate sanctions to get members to comply or to improve their behaviour. Unfortunately, the current standards process does not have a great deal of teeth or sanctions available to myself or others in the process in relation to members. A lot of it relies on group business managers or whips to members of the public who don't understand what a group business manager is, to get members to comply with some of the sanctions that are put in place. There is an ongoing look at reviewing standards, but I think that it probably is taking a fairly low priority, with government being busy dealing with lots of other things at the moment. And so the extent to which and how quickly we will get appropriate sanctions in place, your guess is probably as good as mine. But I think it's fairly clear from everybody, members, monitoring officers, others, members of the public, if they were asked, that the sanctions are insufficient at the moment. In relation to dealing with poor behaviour by members. I think I have covered most of the things that you've responded. You asked a question about Councillor Bolt. Is there anything that I've missed?
Through you, Chair. No, I think
Yes.
Thanks very much. Just one supplementary, if I may. Yeah, as you say, the legislation says that Kirklees is required to carry out the monitoring. I would draw a parallel. Legislation also says that Kirklees is the elections authority for town and parish councils. Is there any difference in the way that those legislations are framed? Because the elections office recharges town and parish councils for carrying out elections. Now, yeah, the point is does it say in election legislation that you can recharge, and is that omitted from standards legislation? If not, yeah, then again, let's have parity that if we charge for elections, we charge for standards, or don't charge for them.
Okay, Councillor Bolt, I'll come back to you in relation to that, because I don't have the specific details of charging for town and parish council elections. Obviously, I know that we do that. As you know, you're referring to that as the obviously. I think you're still the current chair of one of the town councils of Kirklees, so you're fully aware of the fact that we do charge. I will have to come back to you with the details of what it says in the legislation around that. But I think it is different.
You've been charging when you're not allowed to.
I don't think that that's the case.
Yeah. I would be very surprised and that would be the case, Councillor Bolt. But yeah, if you could, Julie, if you could come back on that'd be much appreciated. Councillor Homewood, you've been sat there very patiently waiting. So if you could raise the points that you wanted to pick up.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point. It was just following what David was saying at the end of his presentation, really. So I think it would be helpful to see the trends in relation to the themes of the complaints. I think if we're looking at the codes of conduct, when we're looking at the code of conduct, when we've looked at social media guidance, we've also talked about what guidance or training should be provided to councillors. I think we need to understand whether the things that we're doing or recommending here are actually successful, or whether we need to relook at them. And I think, like you say, if we're just seeing volumes, being driven maybe by a spike of one case that was particularly high profile or whatever, that isn't going to give us that understanding. So I think if we can do that, I think that would be helpful, and just perhaps have some commentary to say whether actually we think some of the things that we've done have actually been helpful or successful, or whether we need to relook at them. For example, things like social media, it does feel to me that there's been less incidences of that type of thing recently, but it'd be good to know if that is the case, or whether that's just my assumption based on what I've seen in the media. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Homewood. Just quick comment from myself on that. I think once you've seen that information, I think you'll find that social media is still a very significant issue, indeed, for us in terms of the complaints. And I think it is the case as well that if we're in an unfortunate situation where a member, whether that's a member of Kirklees or a member of parish or town council, continues with the same behaviour and is not complying, and as already been said, the sanctions really don't help us in actually stopping that happening unless the member complies, then we could see spikes over a number of years, obviously with a 4-year election period. So that is a difficulty for us. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it would be very good to have that split as well, and look at that breakdown. If that's okay, David.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine. I mean, it's something that's occurred to me myself, independently of the discussion here, that perhaps we do need to get a bit more analysis in there, and a bit more breakdown, and make the figures a bit more meaningful, rather than, as Councillor Homewood said, just providing you with totals doesn't really sort of give you much of a context in terms of what the complaints are about, and the true volumes, if you like, of the complaints coming in.
And I think, I know we've discussed this previously, but I think it's very important that information would help us, I believe, then to look at what we can do in terms of a combination of training, communication across all members, including parish and town councils, as to the impact of these sorts of issues and what sort of behaviours and how we operate. Obviously, we do that already, but I think that would strengthen it. So yeah, that would be good. Okay, thank you. Unless there's anything else, we'll move on. No, David. Okay, so if we could move on to item 8, which is the cases and news update. And again, David, if you would kindly take us through.
Yeah, no problem. Please. Yeah, this is another report that we present to the committee every time we meet, and it's basically a roundup of anything that's happened that's been newsworthy, that's either of interest or has an impact on the wider world of local authority standards. So what we tend to do is we tend to look and see what's been going on around England, which is slightly more difficult than for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own standards process where things are dealt with on a central basis. So we have various centralised reports from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, whereas England, we're relying on either what's been reported in newspapers or what's on other councils' websites, which is very hit and miss in terms of people actively reporting anything that relates to any standards investigations. And of course, in common with us, if anybody was looking from the outside at our website to get an idea of what standards were like within Kirklees, unless they're going on to the reports that we prepare for the Standards Committee, such as the one we just discussed, then they're going to be seeing the ones where they've gone through the formal process and we've had an outcome because we've published those on our website. But so we look at various things with this. We also look at what's going on in the media, or particularly sort of the specialist media. So I tend to look at what's happening on local government lawyers in local government, and as well as the Standards Board's websites. So there's some articles that I've pulled out from Local Government Lawyer, which might be of interest to the committee. They're all in Appendix A. One or two things that might be of particular interest. And I know this one that I'm going to discuss has now been resolved, but in July 2020, Wakefield Council were put in a position where they had to explain to residents that there were no powers to remove a councillor being convicted of sexual offences. He'd been convicted but was yet to be sentenced, and obviously members of the public in Wakefield were up in arms about this. And it comes down to where we are in terms of what Julie was saying earlier about the fact that there aren't any sufficient sanctions. It's very difficult where you've got something like this to remove a councillor, and if that councillor's not prepared to resign, then they can sort of sit there until such time as they are kicked off by virtue of being convicted, or rather than being sentenced. I've also pulled out a case in the High Court around lobbying. I thought it was interesting myself. It sort of looked about when the rules around lobbying. It's a good guide to when lobbying is good and vital and important, and when it oversteps the mark. But I think the general sort of view of the courts on this was that lobbying isn't something that's wrong. It's something that's if it's done in the right way and it's open and transparent, then there's nothing wrong with lobbying. Interestingly, the LLG website published a report from NAUC that was looking at issues around the power of suspension and urgently asking for such a power to be introduced. In June 2020, there was a report that I picked up on about a community council in Wales who was trying to secure an injunction to prevent him being investigated by the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. And just the general search I do of local newspaper articles, various stories about councillor conduct, including a report of one council receiving almost 180 complaints in 6 months. So if you think we've got it bad with 60 in 6 months, they've had 180. A councillor was removed from a virtual meeting. One council fighting back about social media posts, and the Standards Commission were talking about doing an online hearing. I know there's other stuff that people have sort of pointed out as well. I know there's one where my understanding, and Julie might correct me if I'm wrong, is that I think it was a town or parish councillor, was actually participating in a virtual meeting whilst driving a lorry, and was actually sort of driving along and participating on a tablet or phone, and of course that's
unbelievable.
It is. You'd think you'd either pull over and do it, or send your apologies. But there we are.
So it was a district councillor, I think, actually, and I think the police were investigating it. But it could have led to a potential standards complaint. I would imagine that the police sanction would be perhaps a more effective one than the standards one.
Probably eclipse anything that the standards regime could do. We've looked at some recent published decisions on here. I've pulled out some extracts, and they're all published in Appendix B. There's also an extract from the Local Government Ombudsman for Wales. They've not published a casebook, but they did publish an annual report in May 2020. So I've pulled some figures and stats out of that for you all to look at. There's some various trends that they've pulled out, probably better than I can do. Dropping complaints. Of 18% in Wales, decrease in what has been described by the Ombudsman there as frivolous complaints. So I don't know whether they've just dropped naturally, or whether the Ombudsman has been just very disapproving, and it's had an effect on those complaints being made. As I said, there's no case law that I found that's particularly relevant beyond the one we've already mentioned about the lobbying issues. So, understandably, probably the Committee on Standards have been fairly quiet in their follow-up work to their report. They used to have feedback on this as part of the sort of standing items on their meeting agendas, but it seems to have dropped off, which is probably indicative of the fact that in terms of priorities, they're recognising that perhaps central government have got other things to worry about rather than sort of tidying up loose ends from the Committee on Standards in Public Life report. Having said that, it's noted that the chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life has written to the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government just with an inquiry as to how soon the government are likely to provide a response. So in terms of, we've got a further report on to come on.
Yeah, we have.
Committee on Standards in Public Life and how they're asking us how we're getting on in terms of we're looking at the issues and we'll deal with that in due course.
Yep.
LGA consultation on the Model Draft Code of Conduct. I've checked the LGA's website today and there's nothing on there about any further developments on this. So obviously the consultation's closed, the response is awaited. It looks like we'll have to wait till we meet again to get a formal report on what the LGA's response is to the Model Code of Conduct. Obviously, members here were asked to participate, and I hope people did take the time to do that. Obviously, we'll wait to see whether the draft code of conduct gets amended or not following the consultation. So we'll keep our eyes open on that and flag that to the committee in due course.
Thank you, David. Is that you
Go on. Yeah, just one last thing. Yeah. This is very hot off the press. The Lawyers in Local Government have published a social media toolkit that was published at the end of August. There's a copy of Appendix C. I intend to have a good look at it and see whether there's anything we can use in terms of dealing with use of member issues and do some member training. It's written largely for people like Julie rather than elected members. It's very sort of looking at things from a legal position rather than anything else. But nevertheless, it's still probably a valuable document. Just gives some pointers and good examples of good practice and bad practice, backing it up with some issues that have been put before the courts. So that's about it for that report, unless there are any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, David. I'll make a few comments, and while people are thinking of some questions, I think seems to be a very interesting organisation, the Lawyers for Local Government, and certainly, as you said, and you've got it in your report, they've been very upfront about this issue of power of suspension, and also I gather pretty critical of the code of conduct as well in terms of the feedback. So certainly it's good to see that there's a strong view coming through from that group of people who you would hope would be listened to, because clearly have got the expertise and knowledge and experience to feed into this. So so fingers crossed that does have some impact, because we in every meeting that I've now been involved in standards, we talk about this subject. So so I do hope that the LLG gets listened to. Anyway, was there any comments or questions? Oh, Councillor Bolt, see your hand up there. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I mean, interesting, the Holborn Studios, the Hackney one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm aghast that a council is actually telling elected members that they shouldn't listen to all sides of the story before making a decision. I've sat on planning training at Kirklees, and in fact, there were corrections made for the way that Kirklees operates, because at one time Kirklees planning members used to tell people that, oh, sorry, I can't talk to you, I'm a member of the planning committee, when the actual fact is, yes, you can, provided you give the caveat that anything I say is based on what you say now, and I will make the decision based on the information before me on the day. And in this case, telling people it is advised that you don't contact councillors before a meeting. Yeah, that's ridiculous that people can't put information before members of the planning committee or anything. because you run the risk there of a council being said that it's cherry picking the information given to members. So I think this is welcome, and probably a bit more clarity for Kirklees to make sure, because planning committees are one of the great reputational risks, or the planning process, one of the great reputational risks for all councils. And I would hope that we will make sure that we have some clarity and communication in Kirklees to ensure that the public know that they can contact, and obviously members do declare lobbying before meetings. So I was aghast to read what Hackney were doing, and they need the wrist slapping.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt. Councillor Sokol? You're on mute, Councillor Sokol. Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
You're okay now.
Yeah. Following on Councillor Martin Board's question about this communication from members of the public, we do get some letter before the planning committee. We have sometime a week before or sometime ago. We do read those letters or email from the residents. Yeah, either against or in favor. Sorry, my mobile was just there. Yeah.
Not a problem.
We do read the emails from the members, either against the application or in favor of application. Yeah, we sometimes get from the agent of the applicant. But we declare we don't respond back. I don't know. Some people might no. We never do give any response back and leave it there. So I don't know. Hackney council, how they do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sokol. I know I have to say, as still a fairly new councillor when I was first elected, fortunately I had a little bit of experience on planning with the parish council, but you do certainly go into the area of planning with trepidation around this, and it's quite right. We do need to make sure there's clarity both for the public and councillors. It's not always an easy situation. Councillor Homewood, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It was just sort of touching on some of those stories, and also what we discussed earlier. Obviously, you mentioned a few times, and we've discussed in previous meetings about standards and the lack of teeth that we have in order to take action. And obviously you see that case in Wakefield, which is a pretty extreme example of that. And I'm just wondering what is the situation here in terms of, is it requiring potentially legislation from government to change that? Because we know that in Parliament now they have this right of recall, and I don't know whether that's the right thing for local government, but I feel that yes, obviously that Wakefield case is an extreme example, but I think generally the public need to be determined who they want as their councillors. But it does seem strange to me that you can have somebody potentially who is elected for 4 years, and in the first month of that does something totally unacceptable, and then there's no comeback for 4 years. They can sit there, take their allowances, do whatever they want. And the public gets no say in that, and there's no opportunity for really any significant action to be taken. So are we kind of expecting that to be looked at? Are we lobbying for more of that, or is the LGA looking at that? I just wonder what the sort of view and position is from our perspective.
Well, thank you, Councillor Homewood. I see Julie, you put your hand up, so I guess you're going to respond on that.
Yes, if you'd like me to,
Yep.
I will. Thank you for the question, Councillor Homewood. It is at the moment there aren't any powers available to us. There's no power of recall, which is similar to MPs, and we are faced with a situation where, in theory, somebody could get elected and have 4 years to commit an offence for which they aren't convicted, or they're convicted and it's a low level offence which wouldn't lead to automatic removal under legislation, where they would effectively continue to receive their their council allowance, which is difficult. In the case of Wakefield, you probably, I mean, some of you might be saying, well, hang on, if they were a member of the group, what were the group doing about it? Because actually there are powers within your own political parties to suspend somebody. As I understand it, and this was a great frustration for my fellow monitoring officer in Wakefield, the individual withdrew themselves from the group and became an independent. And so therefore there were no there's nothing available within political parties to suspend the individual, awaiting the outcome of the decision and how they were sentenced. So there was a delay where they continued to take their council allowance during that period. There were, of course, a number of conversations with the individuals, as far as I'm aware, as you would expect. But the legislation doesn't enable the monitoring officer to suspend individuals in that way. In terms of lobbying, yes, I understand that there is a significant amount of lobbying going on through different groups, including lawyers in local government and the LGA, to ask that we have better powers of suspension in extremis to deal with very difficult issues in relation to behaviour. One of the things that was suggested in the piece of work done by the committee looking at ethical standards was we have a power of suspension, but there's a power to appeal to the Ombudsman. At the moment, as you probably know, the standards process doesn't have a power to appeal to anybody. People can appeal about the process, but they can't appeal about the decision to the Ombudsman. In the recommendations from the committee looking at ethics in local government, they suggested we introduce the power to suspend, but then there was a right of appeal to the Ombudsman. We're still awaiting that, and I think, as I've already commented, it's really important that we do that we get an outcome to that. But it's not at the top of the list of what I think are concerns for government at the moment, and I think it does rely on our, individual groups, individual councils, groups of councillors through different means to lobby government to ask that we have this power at our fingertips if we need it. We shouldn't obviously use it in all circumstances. It should only be used in extremis, but we do need to have that. We do need to have a number of sanctions available to us which are taken seriously and which can be enforced. Hopefully that responds to your point. So please, feel free to continue to lobby through your appropriate groups, your political parties, but also other groups as well.
Thanks, Julie. Absolutely agree. I think the more this message comes through in all avenues, the better. It's absolutely clear that we need that. I think it's crucial to ensure that we continue to have the confidence of the public, because it's just inexplicable for members of the public, and I'm sure many of you have been approached, or certainly I've been approached, and we've had this through either Kirklees or the parish, where people just cannot understand why there isn't this ability to sanction. And in fact, I know personally I've explained to a number of people the situation probably at least half a dozen times, and they still ask me the same question because they just find it quite unbelievable. Anyway, Councillor Bolt, was your hand up again for another point that you wanted to raise?
Yes, please, Chair. While we're looking at what we see from other areas, it was mentioned earlier that obviously we post the outcome of our own hearings on the website. I was just having a look at our website, recorded councillor complaints, and certainly they are all 2019. Does that mean that we haven't had any conclusions of complaints with any sanctions or anything since December of last year?
Okay, Councillor, but David, I see your hand up. Will you be able to pick that up, please?
Yeah, I mean, the report obviously does record that we had a number of complaints all about the same council that went through the formal standards process. there has been an outcome. There's a technical issue with IT as to why it's not been published on the website. I sent it to them and asked them to publish it, but it's something I need to discuss with IT. But it's there. It's awaiting publication.
Yeah. So David, to clarify, that is the only.
Yes.
That's the only case this year.
Only
one.
Okay. This year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no other comments or questions, I'd move on to the committee and standards in public life follow-up. If again, David, I know we get you to do most of the talking. I'm very sorry about this, but you're always very informative. So there we go.
Okay. Well, hopefully this is the shortest and sweetest of the three reports. If you cast your mind back to when we were discussing. In January, well, it came out in January 2020, so I expect we were discussing it in May 2019, about the report from the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And you'll probably recall that they had a whole list, they had a wish list of things they would like to see, and they also had a best practice list. And they did sort of indicate that they would be following up with councils to see how they were progressing in terms of adopting the suggested best practices. So this report actually refers to that follow-up exercise. So if you actually look at the report in Appendix A, we've got a very nice email from Leslie Bainsfair, who's the head of the Secretariat of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, indicating that they would have been following up with us on how far we'd progressed, but for the COVID issue. So it's a sort of polite letter saying, well, we would have been doing this, but it's been delayed slightly, but we will be coming back to you sometime in the autumn to ask you how you've progressed. So they also sent us as a reminder, the list of best practices that were extracted from the original report. And as you're aware, this is something that we did discuss at length as the Standards Committee, and we made decisions on the best practice suggestions. These are recorded in Appendix C. So what we've got is it's just literally a list of all of the best practice suggestions, and what our response is. It's either something along the lines of, well, we've already been doing it anyway. Yes, we're now doing it, or we're adopting it in part. I'm thinking in terms of the one we're sort of adopting in part is the best practice recommendation number 3, which is principal authorities should review their code of conduct each year and regularly seek, where possible, the views of the public, community organisations and neighbouring authorities. And of course, as a committee, I think you felt that doing that on an annual basis would be pretty much onerous. It'd be almost be like painting the fourth bridge. You'd have a consultation exercise, and by the time you'd reviewed your code of conduct with all the consultation responses, you'd be kicking off the process again. So I think the decision was that it was going to be a halfway house. So yes, it was a good suggestion that we seek wider views when reviewing the code of conduct, that it was more feasible to do it on a biannual basis rather than on an annual basis, but noting also at the same time that there is a review of the code of conduct on an annual basis. So we're sort of saying that that's one we are complying with, because it says where possible. We're saying it's not possible, so arguably we're complying with it. But so that's really just where we are. So in due course, we will be providing that information back to the Committee on Standards in Public Life.
So in summary, there are no issues. We are very much aligned with best practice, apart from one small difference, and that's the consultation over annual reviews. Apart from that,
yeah, I mean, I don't think there was any issues that I can remember that arose with the best practice suggestions, and the committee thought they were inappropriate or unsuitable or unfeasible. So sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions or comments you wish to raise on this item? It's pretty straightforward, to be fair. Councillor Boat.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just the best practice 15, that senior members of staff should meet with political group leaders or whips to discuss standards issues. Seems to be a matter of duplication. If group leaders and senior officers want to talk about standards, I would suggest they come to the Standards Committee Yeah, that's why you have members deputed to sit on those bodies. If other people want to involve themselves in it, then by all means take a seat at this table.
Mm-hmm. I take your point, Councillor Bolton. I think it does refer in there to the Standards Committee, but I would, Julie, I don't know if you want to come in this. I would assume this is also some of the perhaps informal meetings that you have as well. I assume, but Julie,
Yeah,
I'll leave you.
I think this is meant to cover informal meetings as well, and whilst you're right, members can come to Standards Committee. There are sometimes sort of issues that it's worthwhile talking to group leaders about outside of Standards Committee. Obviously, this committee doesn't make decisions in relation to most standards issues. The role of Standards Committee is quite is within fairly strict parameters. The sort of decision making in relation to behavioural issues is primarily taken at a different level to try and get some kind of speed in the decision making as a result of the review that took place back at the in 2011-12. So this committee's role is quite limited to that extent. It would only ever probably get involved in making decisions on actual standards issues or complaints if it was a very serious matter which had gone to an internal or an external investigation, and there was a report back here, and we were setting up a standards committee, a standards subcommittee to look at it, which would probably then be likely to be going to council for some kind of censure. That's in extremis without having any kind of ability to suspend. That's the most that we have available to us if somebody does something which is particularly heinous. So you're right. We do invite lots of people to standards committees. If we can encourage more people to attend, that would be excellent. So we can have wider conversations and draw people's attention to some of the particular issues that are going on, some of the issues and trends around other parts of the country. I genuinely do try to highlight to people those issues when I have one-to-ones with group business managers and in group business manager meetings, and I also meet with group leaders once or twice a year to talk to them about any issues they might have or concerns they might have, which they might not want to necessarily share at Standards Committee, but they might want to have a conversation with me as monitoring officer. So hopefully that answers or responds to your question, Councillor Bolt. But the more people we can get to attend this meeting and to listen to and read the reports, the better as far as I'm concerned, because actually it's really important people are aware of some of the issues and concerns. And the more we can explain this to members of the public, the better, again, as far as I'm concerned.
I couldn't agree more. I think certainly it would be nice to see this screen absolutely full of faces. So yeah, hopefully we can encourage more people to come along. Was there any supplementary, Councillor Bolt? Was that okay?
Thank you, Chair.
That's okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we've covered everything. I've certainly got no further issues. Thank you, members, for participating, and as usual, to you as you officers for your really great support on this. And once again, David, thank you for the. It's not quite the one-man show. We do our best to get in there and help you, but we do appreciate all the hard work you put in here and actually the presentations coming here as well. So thank you very much. Okay. So at that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.